I think now it's really about humility and it's about vulnerability. I would say my experience of leading an organisation in this day and age where the world changes really quickly, where we don't know a lot and where the answers seem to be from diverse sources, the more vulnerable and humble you are, the more you can tap into the wisdom of others. And then it's really about synthesising that knowledge to make a call. And that is really hard, but they would be my two qualities. I would say humility was not a great strength of mine. I started my experiences, I lost a friend of mine to suicide when I was 14, and I made a decision to pursue mental health and suicide prevention at that age and have been very focused my whole life. As a result, I have a lot of knowledge about a very narrow set of things and like being the expert, so like sharing that knowledge and challenging authority. So I think I also enjoy being the outsider and challenging rules. And so for me, that humble piece of sometimes it's not helpful to challenge rules, sometimes it's helpful to bring people into the existing rules, and sometimes it's actually really good to shut up and listen to others were big lessons for me that I had to learn and still have to learn. The first thing is I don't think they spend enough time on themselves understanding their own strengths and vulnerabilities. I think the other part is that many leaders believe that they've got there through skill and quality alone and don't realise the inherent advantages that you have. So in my case now, being a middle-aged male, people just listen to you more. You're not smarter, but you have greater entitlement and greater access. And you can trick yourself into thinking that you're smart when really you're just given advantage. And I think that's where I've really noticed leaders trip up, where they believe too much of their success is driven by their own capabilities rather than the opportunities given to them. Non-profit leaders are actually really constrained by the levers they can pull to get performance. That if they run a bad business, they can't access capital markets, they can't go back to their shareholders, they can't go into debt, they can't offer opportunities like bonuses to their staff. So what it means is non-profit leaders are really, really good at pulling the levers of mission, of values, of culture. And I think for-profit leaders, one of the restrictions on them is it's easy just to offer your people bonuses or go back and get debt or say everybody's having a tough time. So that's, I think, the first thing. The narrowness actually has really helped me as a non-profit leader. The second thing I would say for-profit leaders can learn is about complexity of stakeholders. So the big one for non-profit leaders is the customers you serve are different than the people who give you money. And in effect, that difference means that you've got to always weigh up how much you meet the needs of each, and therefore the complexity of how you manage your organisation through that. Probably the key advantage that non-profit leaders have is they have a clarity of purpose that makes decisions, I think, kind of far easier beyond should we make money or not. So I think the first thing is, are they high performing for the problem you're trying to solve? I think we've tended to see high performing teams as an abstract concept that they can somehow work in multiple environments. So for me, that comes back to, well, what's the problem that the business is trying to solve? In a non-profit environment, if I look at Reach Out that I led, it was about how can we help all young people be happy and well? And therefore I wanted a group of people who could bring capability to that mission, but also our business model was using the internet. So how could I then bring that capability to bear and do it that way? So that's the first question for me. I think the second question is, do we have an agreement on how we choose to behave as we're hitting that destination? And I would say high-performing teams are very, very clear, not only on the values, but on the behaviours that you jointly agree to display those values in any given environment. And where you get differences, people spend an enormous amount of time interpreting everybody else's intentions, and and it's just, I think it just drags the whole thing down. Some of the best for me has actually been watching people take on leadership roles in other spaces. There wasn't always room to grow in our organisation, so they had to leave, and they're doing amazing things outside the organisation that's still largely in service to the mission of Reach Out. So they stay in mental health, or they stay in social service delivery, or they run research organisations, and that's been really great. I think the other thing that I've always taken great satisfaction from was watching the organisation, since I have departed, do really good things. And I once heard that all leaders are simply passing the baton to the next leader, and that it's your job to set up the handover as well as you can. It's their job to run their race. And that was so I really kind of fascinated by the work that the person who's succeeding me, Ash, is doing. He's doing a great job at Reach Out. And I think I set up that baton handover really well. I think the big thing is that the world around us is moving in seismic jolts. And therefore the assumptions of good performance can change in a relatively short period of time. And really good organisations, whether you call it adaptability or agility, it's really about the ability to change quickly and change things that you thought you held to be precious but are willing to change in the service of something greater. So I'd say that that would be the big part in an unstable environment. That ability to shift and let things go quickly is probably the biggest skill. The other thing that I'm seeing is a major generational difference, that the younger generation coming through, who are now, say, having their first kids, genuinely value things differently to an older generation. They are used to valuing services rather than things. They're used to valuing experiences rather than possessions. And therefore the sorts of rewards that you give to those people, I think, in an organisation needs to be different. And many organisations are getting that wrong. So I look at this with, we often view flexible arrangements in workplaces through a gender lens, as if they only apply to women. But actually a younger generation, both men and women, want flexibility, want to spend time with their families differently, want to have interrupted careers, and good organisations are moving through that quickly. Organisations that are really struggling, I think, to adapt to this new world are still seeing things through the wrong lens. So I think the first part of that is a leader's job is actually about the performance of the organisation. And so I think for really great leaders are seeing mental health and wellbeing through a performance lens. Leaders who are struggling with this are seeing it through a welfare or staff benefit lens. And when I talk about a performance lens, it's actually, we operate in the cognitive economy. Almost all businesses are actually monetize the brains of the people in it. And therefore, once you understand that your business monetizes people's brains, then actually the value of that business and your competitive advantage is how well those brains are at any given point in time and how well used those brains are at any given point in time. Once you understand that, this is actually, mental health and wellbeing are actually a core performance competitive thing. And good leaders are then saying, what do we need to do to get that working? I think leaders who are struggling around this are still seeing this through the lens of, our people are struggling and we should look after them. And what ends up happening there is it always gets delegated to an HR lead or a people lead, and they don't see it through a leadership lens, and therefore miss opportunity. There isn't always a mental health problem, but there's a stress problem. And what happens when the brain is stressed is its higher order cognitive functions get limited, and people move into a space of executing what they already know but struggling to change. And so the biggest issue then in an environment which requires groups of people to change dynamically and very, very quickly is, if your people are stressed, they're going to be very resistant to that, and it's going to be harder to shift to where you need it to shift. So for me, the key thing is, if your people have high levels of well-being, when you're presented with an external shock that changes the conditions on which your business assumes performance, then it's relatively easy to get them to shift with you. If they are stressed, if they're just trying to manage what they're doing and you say, hey, guess what, all those things that you thought were important are no longer important, then you'll get resistance and change will be really, really hard. I think awareness of mental health and wellbeing is going up. A lot of leaders are genuinely worried about it, and it's because they care about their people. I think there's very few leaders that are not caring people, and the point that I make to them is that if you follow that line of logic, your answers will always be limited. If it's just about caring for your people, your answers will be limited. But if it's actually about the performance of your business, then just as you invest in supply chain as part of continuous improvement, just as you invest in customer relations as part of continuous improvement, you also invest in your people and their well-being as part of continuous improvement. So I think the part that's not dropping for a lot of leaders is that this issue won't go away. You can't simply say, didn't we do that training last year? It's actually about continuous improvement. It's about building the capability of your people to thrive in a quickly changing environment. And therefore it should be the top of any agenda of a leadership group continuously. And you should always seek for improvement rather than managing it and hoping it'll go away. When I was running Reach Out, we had, I think in about a 3 or 4 year period, we had 6 ministers and 4 prime ministers. And no leader of a complex portfolio can come in without any knowledge and nail it within the first 6 months. So the biggest problem that I see in the political environment is really, really high turnover. And therefore what happens is you manage the business as usual rather than manage the change. And so I think many of those leaders are highly capable, but they're not in the role long enough to really make a difference. And I'm hopeful that we have a period of relative political stability so that you can have a minister responsible for mental health, for example, who can tackle the reform agenda that we need to really start making a difference before handing the baton on. And I look at that through an organisation. I can't see a scenario where you would invest in a business where the chairman changed 4 times and the CEO changed 6 times, and you'd say that's a good, stable business. So that is the problem that we have, is that everyone could be smart, but if you don't have stability of leadership, you can't have performance through change. I think one of the things that I concentrate on is curiosity. That one of the great benefits of spending my career in non-profits is people who have a huge experience and leadership capability across a whole range of industries make themselves available to you for free. And that has meant that I've really learned and had direct experience from some amazing people across a variety of industries. And I've really taken that away, which is if you're curious, if you really try and understand lots of things, then you can see complexity and you can kind of take the nuggets from everybody. And that's something that I do a lot through reading, through listening to podcasts, through talking to lots of people, having multiple, in my mind, having multiple mentors is a key part of it. And that's something that I also kind of share with others, and I always try to do in our organisation and still do in the Wellbeing Outfit, which is curiosity is the key, because it makes us more interesting human beings, but also means that we can sometimes see answers and opportunity in people that you would otherwise not pay attention to. How do you make sure that people are doing what they're doing and they're progressing their own life in the context of why we're paying them? So it can't just be about you. It has to be about you and us, and we have to be able to benefit from that. But also then about, does this help you be a more interesting human being, and learning experiences to be a more interesting human being? And a great example of that, Reach Out under my predecessor, Jack, had started reflection leave, a week's worth of leave that people could access. And one of the things that I put in place around reflection leave was that you could access it just to be a more interesting human being. And that for me meant that people spent time doing deep reflection and often came to really important moments in their life that helped them progress in our organisation or leave to something else that better served their needs. And if you look through the point of vulnerability and curiosity is about bringing knowledge to you, but you've still got to synthesise that and make a call and say, this is where we're going. And so part of that ego piece is still the confidence to say, here's how I've synthesised it, here's where we're going, and we're back that direction. Because I think what can also be crippling in leadership is a leader who keeps changing their mind because they think that there's something more interesting on the horizon. So for me, that confidence to execute and give people the clarity to execute and to follow you and believe that you know what you're doing is still a really important part of leadership. But if it happens in the absence of gathering knowledge from a broad range of sources, then you limit, I think, what you can achieve. So the Wellbeing Outfit is a specialist consultancy business in mental health and wellbeing. A lot of what we do is help organisations improve their performance by improving the wellbeing and mental health of their people. And that's, I think, the next big opportunity, which is, if I look at the first part of my career is around public service, how do I help young people and their parents have happy and well lives? The other part for me is we spend a lot of our time in work. And if going to work improves your well-being and having people of high well-being improves the performance of the business, then we have a real great coming together of needs. And I love that. I love that opportunity to spend time in lots of different organisations understanding why they do what they do and how I could help them improve what they do while also caring for their people.